And maybe just a quick thing on promotions. I think closely tied to this is like remuneration, right? So even if you're not getting a title change, I think it's important to be getting value for what you're providing in terms of the work that you're doing. So negotiating your salary, there's never a bad time to do that, in my opinion. But if you're going to do that, there needs to be receipts, right? You need to have done the work. You need to be able to show, right? And so like a promotion in that sense, because financial stability is important. I think it's important to think about it as both title but also remuneration as well. And sometimes the latter is easier to get. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Homer.
And these it may again sound very a bit nebulous how what you have to do to get promoted, but all these things are in each company are written down. It's very
Yeah.
when in big companies it's written down what you need to do to be at one level, how that compares to the next level, how it compares to the next level. So with all my all the people who work from all my team, I sit down first before we even start a project and say, here's what you need to do to get to the next level. Then there may be 10, 12 things with slightly different wording. It's like maybe for lower levels, contribute, manager levels, it's lead, for lead contribute to a project or lead a project. And then we sit and say, well, at the end of the year, how will we show that we've evidenced this? And that turns into a work plan that you then say, well, I actually realize I need to go and do some extracurricular activities because I haven't done anything to contribute to the wider term and a wider firm. And so I need to put that in. And it's really important to plan it from the very beginning if you want to make it.
Yeah, maybe just one comment, because I think you raise an important point that it is not on you to design everything that you need to do for the year to be successful. It should be a collaborative process with your manager. Like it's not, you're not sitting in a silo doing this. So absolutely work with your team, your managers to say what's going to be valued, what's going to be important here.
Cool. Let's talk about getting to manager then. Jonathan, do you want to kick us off with getting to manager? Like, how do you become a manager? What makes a good manager? What's a bad manager? What are your?
So I think for me, and I'm very new to this, just starting to like manage recently. But I think for me, one of the things especially as I moved up through the organization, was I paid very close attention to the managers that were good for me. I've had both good and bad managers, right? And I think like learning from that and making sure I don't repeat what I thought were the mistakes of the managers I had, who were well intentioned, but maybe who didn't create the right conditions for me to succeed, so to speak. So I think one of the things I'd say is just I think of my role as a manager as sort of being the rails on a bridge. So I don't want to be I don't want to get in the way of the work that's being done. If you do a good job of hiring the right team, right, like being a manager is actually easier, and your job is to remove any obstacles that might exist, right? So making sure people have resources, making sure they have the access that they need, right? And so just sort of removing those obstacles. But I think one of the things that I think is important in order to become a manager is actually adding value to whoever your manager is, right? So making their job easier, getting to a point where like if you're taking a lead on a deliverable, as an associate or like a junior member of the team, the manager doesn't have to spend 2 hours like redoing the entire deck, right? But for them, they're just looking at it over. So consistency, I think, is like the key to really becoming a manager, right? But also like the way I'm thinking about it is, how can I create sort of the environment where the people who I've hired and who I trust can be consistent, right? So making sure they're well paid, making sure they have all the resources they need, taking care of their mental health and checking in on them about that, right? So that's sort of the way I see my role. But then also it's sort of serving as a bridge between senior leadership, right? So making sure that as the team is focused on the day-to-day, don't lose sight of sort of the bigger picture, the bigger vision, what the client really is looking to achieve. And a lot of times that's easier said than done, right? Because you just kind of fall into these, as you said earlier, Ladi, the methodologies, right? So I think always pushing innovation and new ways of thinking For me, that's what like good managers do, and bad managers, I think, micromanage. There might be situations where it's important to micromanage, but sort of like I think finding the balance between trusting and verifying is very critical.
Absolutely
Yeah.
agree with that.
Do you want to go, Britney?
It's up to you. Were you about to jump in? Otherwise, I have some thoughts.
I was just to say that I think just picking up a point. One thing is making your manager's life easier. To get to manager, you mean that's basically your job is how can I make your life easier? Because your manager has all the workload, all the responsibility, and essentially it's on their head. So your role is to say make their life easier, and that sometimes means going above and beyond, asking for what else can I do, and quickly when you understand the complexities of management, you'll sooner get there. I think there's also this piece difference between. I was chatting with one of my team the other day. Kind of leadership and management. I think there's slightly different. I think management it's actually very operational. So it's about how can I structure the task, the goal, the mission, the vision. How can I structure in a way to allow someone else to be able to take that up and thrive and get to reach their goal? I think management is about providing people the right skills, knowledge, and resources to allow someone else to get their job done really well. That's management, and that can be anything from being very clear on what the task is, when the due date is, what success is, and then even stretching what a stretch goal would be. It's very very formulaic in the way how you manage, and there's some great books I can recommend about good management. And then, Jonathan, you touched on this piece about leadership, which I think as well, which is, you have difference between being a micromanager, someone who empowers, and someone who's being very directive. There's different leadership styles. So you can be a very good manager, but be a very poor leader, because you can get all the work done, hit your results, but everyone in the team feels like you've slanted them and they don't really feel comfortable working with you. And I think being a good leader is about understanding that everybody's different and has different styles of working, and what you need to do to get the best out of those people by adapting your own personality. I think something that comes down to a lot of EQ. But we won't go too much into leadership, and maybe stick with the management, and then maybe just pass it over to you, Britney.
Yeah, no, I think both of you have raised some excellent points, right? I love the idea of removing barriers and thinking about a leader versus a manager. Couldn't agree more. One of the things that I'm looking for when I'm looking at managers is how well can they absorb the context in which they're in? Do they understand what the work that they're doing means for the client? What does it mean for the firm? What does it mean for their part of the firm? Because understanding that context will change the way they tell the story, the way they may motivate some of their teammates. But I think it goes a long way, and it changes that mindset between, hey, this is just execution, and this is now me driving this type of value in this way, right? And I think people that can make that switch are going to continue to grow. And you can start doing this at any level, to be clear, but at a manager level, I expect to see this. So I think that's a big one. Just trying to think about where else that you both haven't mentioned yet. But I also look at the level of relationships that a manager can build both with the client and internally within the firm, right? So I'm sure many folks, even as analysts, you may get to connect with senior managers and directors. But once you're hitting manager and senior manager, it's like, hey, are you starting to make those VP relationships within your client? And what does that look like? Are they calling you when something is challenging? Are they sending you an email and waiting a couple of days? Like, how urgent, when it is urgent, do they call you or do they call the MD on your account, right? And being able to show command of that relationship will mean a lot in your growth story, right? Because people buy from who they like, people work with who they like. And we want to see evidence that the client likes working with you, that they trust you, and that they want to continue to engage you. So where we can see that, I think that's absolutely important. And likewise, internally in the firm, right? So as a manager, there's nothing stopping you from building relationships with some of the most senior people in the firm, and seeing that those folks also trust you, add to the story and credibility behind your work, and the ability to build relationships and then use those relationships for impact. So not just such and such likes me, but I've been able to influence their agenda. Hey, we took this thing from the client. We learned this lesson. I've now convinced our industry lead that we should do something slightly different because of this. And they're taking those inputs and using them in their broader plan. right? So we want to see influence on some of these senior folks, especially in the internally within the firm.
And maybe just even going on to that, I think you almost touched on a piece. I think we all have, but let's talk about what makes a bad manager. Let's talk about bad managers, and then what do they do? And I should also say that people, please, if you're watching this, please drop your questions in the chat, and we can answer them at the end. But yeah, let's what makes a bad manager. Jonathan,
yeah, and I will say this is going to be. Oh, go ahead, Jonathan. You want to kick us off?
No, Brittany, please go ahead. Seems like you have an answer already. So.
Well, I mean, the first thing I'll say, there are some things I want in a manager that makes a good experience that may not be true for everyone. So it will be a little bit individualized, right? And knowing, again, what you want and what makes you come alive. But I think, if you are not a manager that is overwhelmed is probably the most common form of a bad manager, because then their team is not getting the right attention. And the team will come to you and say, hey, I need details on this, or I need to understand what the rest of the plan is. And if you're underwater and you're not doing the things that your team is going to need, then your team is getting frustrated with you. They become less productive. The overall project becomes less effective and less productive. And it can happen very quickly if you're not communicating with your team, right? And so thinking about how much you take on and how you balance that workload so that you can be in the right position to support your team is so critical. And I think it's something we see quite a bit from new managers learning how to balance the increased workload. Because one of the big things you'll see with being a manager is you're not just doing the work, but you have to go do the storytelling so that your team can get credit for the work. And it takes a lot of time. And I think people underestimate how much time that takes, right? And so I think when I see it's so maybe less of a bad manager, but kind of an early manager mistake that I see a lot, that all of you can think ahead and prepare for. Now, thinking about bad managers, I think, Jonathan, you hit on it, right? If you don't trust your people, it comes through in micromanagement. The team will see it. They'll be unsure of the vision that you're leading towards. It's going to break apart, right? And so you'll have to do a bit of a reset with your team in those moments. I also think about if you're a manager who doesn't have a North Star for your team, that can be really hard, right? Why are we going to follow you if you don't know where you're headed? So take the time to set out the goals for the team, what success looks like, and communicate that down, right? I think as Ladi mentioned, people are looking for confidence from you. So if you can't share the confidence, then you maybe aren't ready. If you're afraid of some of the hard conversations like, hey, you didn't get promoted, or we couldn't get you the money you asked for, or unfortunately, this project is really hard and it sucks right now, and I can't get you on another project. We've got to kind of play nice with the firm, and I need another 3 months, right? If you are afraid of having those conversations, I would rethink whether you want to do people management, right? Because it is glorious when you are promoting people, but you also have to fire people. You also have to deal with performance improvement plans. And so you've got to be ready for all the nuances that come with that, because you may be expecting a straightforward conversation and realize, hey, I didn't get the Britney I was expecting today. She came with a whole attitude, or she came back with a wonderful argument and I wasn't ready for it and I was on the defensive, right? And you've got to be ready for all these different versions of people that are likely to show up when you put them in high stress situations. And so the EQ piece, I think we hit on earlier, gets really important when you're managing people in these dynamic and high achieving scenarios such as consulting. But again, the results can be really, really wonderful, right? Getting to surprise people and say, guess what, we got you promoted early, like that's huge, right? And so those moments make the hard moments worth it.